I'm Ibrahim Al-Asil, a research fellow here at the Middle East Institute, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here today at MEI, and it's an honor for MEI to host the release of the report, Madaya Portraits of a Syrian Town Under Siege. We're joined today by Dr. Ammar Ghanem, former board member of the Syrian American Medical Society, and Ms. Elise Baker, research coordinator at the organization Physicians for Human Rights. They both, with their colleagues from PHR and SAMS, contributed to the report, which they've made public, available also in hard copies, and I think it will be available here in this room by the end of the event. Both Dr. Ghanem and Ms. Baker contributed to the report, and here today they will they'll provide us with remarks from the podium, pictures and slides from the presentations, and give us an overview of the content of the report, key findings, and an overview of Madaya and the Four Towns Agreement. I understand that Ms. Elise Baker and Dr. Ammar Ghanem will speak to us in turn for 25-30 minutes collectively, and then I'll join them to moderate the discussion and field your questions. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Dr. Ghanem is a pulmonologist. He practices with the St. Joseph Medical Group at the DuPont Hospital campus in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He has volunteered his expertise and carried supplies to the region to care for injured Syrians. With his service on the board and other bodies within the Syrian American Medical Society, he has raised awareness and spurred relief for the victims in Syria's civil war. Ms. Elise Baker is the research coordinator at Physicians for Human Rights. She collected the data and developed PHR's online interactive map documenting attacks on healthcare workers and facilities inside Syria. Previously, she studied the effects of post-conflict restoration in several Central African nations. We're delighted to have them here and their colleagues from both SAMS and PHR. Please join me in welcoming them. Elise?
Thank you very much. So I will start by presenting an overview of the report's findings and the background to the report, and then Dr. Ghanem will speak a little more on what it is actually like to be inside Madaya, what it's like for the remaining health workers there and the individuals who are still living under siege there. So since the start of the conflict, the Syrian government has basically waged a multi-pronged attack on healthcare, from targeting ambulances in the field, aiding protesters, targeting doctors who are providing first aid to protesters and opposition fighters and anybody living in opposition-controlled areas, and also by bombing hospitals, attacking hospitals, and denying aid to areas that are controlled by the opposition, and especially denying medical aid to these areas. So this report looks at that sort of last section of their attack on healthcare, the denial of aid, of humanitarian aid, and especially medical aid, and the resulting effects on a civilian population and basically the healthcare conditions in a town under siege. We chose to look at Madaya specifically because there are aid deliveries going through there. Madaya is not the worst of all the besieged areas in Syria. It is just one of approximately 50 that are under siege in Syria. Aid has gotten in over the past 6 months. So it's, there is an opportunity for impact there. There's an opportunity to improve the aid deliveries that are going through there. But it also does not, we want to be clear, it does not represent the worst of all conditions in besieged areas. It is basically the tip of the iceberg in terms of all of the besieged communities across Syria. So Madaya is a small town northwest of Damascus. It's about an hour drive outside of Damascus, and you can see it's close to the Lebanon border. And the siege on Madaya began about a year ago in July of 2015. Syrian government forces launched an offensive on Zabadani, which is a town north of Madaya. This is a territorial control map. The red is Syrian government forces, the green are the opposition-controlled areas. And so you can see Zabadani is the very small area to the north, and then Madaya is a tiny bit farther south. So Syrian government forces launched an assault on Zabadani that displaced thousands of residents to Madaya. Once the residents arrived in Madaya, the Syrian government then basically launched an assault on Madaya itself, severed access between Zabadani and Madaya, and encircled Madaya, besieging 40,000 people inside Madaya. That is approximately 4 times the town's original population, and the population grew so much because of the displacement from Zabadani and the neighboring region to Madaya. So once the Syrian government forces and Hezbollah forces encircled the town, they placed checkpoints surrounding it to ensure that nobody could leave. There are approximately 65 checkpoints that are manned with snipers, and they also placed thousands of landmines around the town, basically ensuring that nobody could get in or out of the town, no aid can be delivered, and basically trapping the 40,000 residents inside without any access to services or equipment or personnel or goods outside the town. Shortly after the siege was put in place, or a few months later, there was a ceasefire agreement that's known as the Four Towns Agreement. It was an agreement between Zabadani and Madaya in rural Damascus, and then 2 towns that were besieged by opposition forces in Idlib, about 200 miles north. This was a sort of agreement between warring parties. It wasn't really a humanitarian agreement, and the agreement was that the Syrian government and Hezbollah forces would stop attacking Zabadani and Madaya if the opposition forces stopped attacking the 2 towns, Foa and Kafraya, in Idlib governorate. And the agreement was also that if they would allow aid into the towns in rural Damascus, if aid would be allowed into the towns in Idlib, and evacuations could happen from Zabadani and Madaya if evacuations were happening simultaneously from the towns in Idlib. So it was a sort of tit-for-tat or reciprocal agreement based on political negotiations rather than humanitarian principles. This agreement allowed some amount of aid to be let in, but not nearly enough. And as a result, basically people inside Madaya died under siege so the siege resulted in 86 preventable deaths, that none of these deaths needed to happen had there been sufficient aid, sufficient services, sufficient medical care. But as a result of the agreement and the basically denial of humanitarian aid and denial of access to services, 86 people died these preventable deaths. So I'll now walk through a sort of timeline that goes through the findings of the report and explain how the lack of aid deliveries led to deaths from malnutrition and starvation, the denial of humanitarian evacuations led to preventable deaths, and healthcare needs increased under the siege as a result of the siege conditions. So I was hoping this would be an interactive timeline, but that function might not be working, so it looks a little cluttered. So I'll try to walk through this as easily as possible. So as I said, the siege began in July of 2015, and a few months later, in September, the Four Towns Agreement came into effect. The first aid delivery that was allowed in happened approximately 1 month later on October 18th. The UN was able to deliver aid for approximately 50% of the population in Madaya, so just 20,000 of the 40,000 civilians, or the food was only sufficient for 20,000 civilians for 1 month. But even some of the aid that was delivered had gone bad. There were high energy biscuits that were delivered that had been stored improperly, had gone moldy. And the health workers inside Madaya reported that after residents ate these moldy biscuits, about 200 had gone to the field hospital and were sick because of the biscuits. So it wasn't enough that the aid that was delivered was insufficient, but it had also gone bad. And during this aid delivery, a few medical staff from the UN were allowed to enter Madaya to evaluate residents and document malnutrition. But again, the medical staff inside Madaya reported that the UN medical staff who had entered Madaya were not actually able to treat the malnutrition. They were only able to document it. The next aid delivery did not occur for about 12 weeks, and in the interim between November 11th and January 10th, the health workers inside Madaya documented 41 deaths from malnutrition and starvation. These deaths occurred again after UN staff had already documented malnutrition and starvation. The needs were known. Everybody knew that the aid needed to enter. The UN was aware of this, and yet the aid did not enter, or more aid did not enter until after these 41 individuals had died, and there was basically a huge campaign from residents of Madaya, from humanitarian organizations, documenting these deaths and saying this is absurd that people are starving to death an hour outside of Damascus where there are warehouses filled with food. So after the international outcry, there was an aid delivery then in early January. It was a series of 3 trucks that provided, or a series of 3 deliveries over 3 days that provided food and medical aid for approximately 1 month. But medical staff in the town reported that the medical aid that was delivered was only sufficient for about 30% of the population. And then following that, in that aid delivery, medical staff were again allowed to enter in order to document malnutrition, but medical staff reported that once again they were not actually able to treat the malnutrition or the conditions that they were documenting there. And then the next time UN staff were able to enter Madaya to deliver aid was approximately 1 month later, and in the interim, 17 people died from malnutrition and starvation. For those individuals who died, it's likely that no amount of food could have saved them at that point, because when a body is so severely malnourished or starving, you need intensive medical care in order to be saved. But that medical care is not available in Madaya. The only health staff in Madaya it's one field hospital that is served by, at this point, 2 dental students and a veterinarian. There are no doctors left in Madaya. They don't have enough equipment, they don't have enough medication, they can't treat severely malnourished individuals. So the next aid delivery that occurred was on February 17th. In that aid delivery, there were supposed to be kits to treat acute malnutrition for children who are suffering from acute malnutrition, but Syrian authorities removed 200 of those kits from that aid delivery so that they were not delivered. And in the weeks following that, 4 individuals died from malnutrition, including 2 children who had acute severe malnutrition, whose only chance to be saved was from those kits that had been previously removed. Around that time, medical staff in Madaya also began reporting cases of kwashiorkor, which is a protein-deficient malnutrition. They reported that there were approximately 200 cases in children, and they requested from UN authorities to deliver a more varied set of food in the next aid delivery. They requested dairy, animal protein, fruits and vegetables so that they could have more protein and more nutrients. But the next aid delivery that occurred on March 17th did not include any of those supplies that they had requested. The only animal protein that was delivered was cans of tuna, and the amount that was delivered provided each resident with approximately half a can of tuna, sufficient for an entire month, which obviously does very little for people who are suffering from malnutrition. So after that next aid delivery on March 17th, 2 additional people died from malnutrition. The fact that individuals were dying in April from malnutrition after there had been three months of aid deliveries before that just shows how inadequate these aid deliveries were, and the fact that there needed to be a better response, whether it was a different type of aid delivery or access to services outside the town, because what was available to residents inside the town was not sufficient to save their lives. The final aid delivery that has occurred was on April 30th. That one, residents reported finally provided sufficient amounts of food and medication, but since then, no additional aid delivery has gone through. That aid delivery only provided aid for 1 month, so that has obviously run out now, or residents were forced to ration it, and they are again reaching conditions that were similar to late 2015, when we were seeing dozens of reports of malnutrition and starvation. If they don't receive aid again soon, more and more people will begin dying from malnutrition and starvation. So during that time, theoretically, medical evacuations should have been able to save some of these lives, but they occurred on a very limited basis, largely because of the 4 towns agreement and the fact that if nobody in Idlib needed to be evacuated, nobody from Madaya could be evacuated. So there were 4 evacuations between January and April that evacuated about 57 people from Madaya, so that obviously did save their lives, but those evacuations did nothing to save the 65 people who died from malnutrition and starvation. And there were also evacuations that were denied for people who had traumatic injuries, who were not suffering from malnutrition or starvation, but who needed basically intensive surgery immediately in order to survive. And those evacuations were denied because of the political negotiations with the Four Towns Agreement. And more recently, at the end of May, a young girl died from malnutrition. The health staff in Madaya had repeatedly requested an evacuation for her, but the request went unanswered, and she died of malnutrition on May 26th. We know that since then, or I should say the research, we finished the research at the end of May, but we know that since then, more deaths have been reported from malnutrition and starvation. More people have died from lack of evacuation, and this will only continue as long as aid deliveries are not going through. There have also been obviously increased healthcare needs as a result of the siege. So the fact that the town is surrounded by snipers and landmines has resulted in traumatic injuries as a result of the siege. So between November 11th and January 10th, medical staff in Madaya documented 10 deaths by landmines and 6 deaths by snipers. Many of those who died were either trying to escape the siege because the conditions were so bad inside, or were trying to gather food, basically collect food in the fields on the outskirts of town, because there was no food available, and they were either, killed by snipers or killed by landmines. But those 16 people who died, that does not represent all of the other injuries that people have sustained from landmines and snipers. There are many more who are inside Madaya who, have been injured by snipers or injured by landmines, who haven't been able to receive adequate treatment to actually, heal their wounds that they got from these injuries, and they are, sitting inside Madaya needing to be evacuated, and not being able to receive those evacuations. There have also obviously been ongoing needs for chronic and acute health care, or for chronic and acute conditions. The doctors in Madaya reported that only the UN aid delivery on April 30th provided the amount and the types of medication that they had requested. All of the previous aid deliveries, there would be some of the medication they had requested was not included. And as a result, one woman died of renal failure on March 15th simply because the medicine she needed to take was not delivered. And certainly those conditions will increase as long as there is insufficient medicine that is delivered. There is also, there have not yet been any severe outbreaks of communicable diseases, but when you have 40,000 people living in a 12 square kilometer, 5 square mile area with, lack of not sufficient sanitation conditions, there will obviously, the chance for diseases spreading is incredibly high. And as long as these conditions continue and worsen, that risk only increases. So where we are now, as I said, the last UN aid delivery arrived on April 30th, and people are again reporting conditions of malnutrition. Medical staff are reporting that children are showing signs of osteoporosis because they have not received enough milk. And they are saying that, we need aid deliveries now, otherwise conditions will be exactly where we were 8 or so months ago. Now we'll turn it over to Dr. Ghanem, who will talk more about conditions for individuals.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank the Middle East Institute for having me today and give me the chance to talk about the suffering of the Syrian people inside Madaya. I would like to thank everybody here today that giving the time and effort to make it here and come and listen to what's going on inside there. Now, I would like to start with introducing myself first, and then I will talk about some personal stories because she covered the report very well. But I'm gonna give you some personal stories about directly from people inside Madaya or happened to my relatives or friends. And also I'll give you some updates since we finished the report. Probably there's some update happened in the last few months. I will give you some update about that as well. Now, actually, I'm born and raised in Zabadani area, which is a nearby town, and Madaya is about only a few miles from Zabadani. I came to the U.S. at age 30, and since that time, I have been in continuous communication with my family there, actually much more since the crisis started in Syria, because I felt responsible for doing something for my own family and friends there. Now, what have been doing in the last 5 years to try to work with an organization called SANS. Probably you heard about Syrian American Medical Society, which I'm proud to be part of that organization. We do a lot of work all over Syria, and we try to reach areas under siege, area under Syria that nobody able to help, and try to assist there. Now, I'm a person from there, so probably I know a lot of facts with daily communication and like hearing from people I know personally. So that's, will give, some facts about what's going on there. I work like with the team also, we established something called the telemedicine service, because as she mentioned before, there's only a few physicians, actually, that 2 dentists and 1 vet that left inside Madaya. So as you know, they are treating humans, and these people need assistance. So we came up with the idea that doing a telemedicine service for them. We did that through a WhatsApp group through the internet, which is not enough, but that's all what we could, do. We actually asked for cameras to do maybe office, like telemedicine office and stuff. We're not able to get cameras inside Madaya to be able to serve, these patients directly. But anyway, what the physician from inside Madaya will consult us on a daily basis on the cases, and we have a multi-specialty on that. And that group that will be able to give consults to the physician inside and do help that way. They send us pictures for dermatology, skin rash. For example, they tell us cases and try to help what kind of antibiotic they choose and so on and so on. Now, all what she mentioned of misery, there is still stillbirth that's happening on a daily basis. And Madaya, they reported about miscarriages, about 30 miscarriages happening in the last few months because of malnourishment, lack of vitamins and minerals, and so on. Not only this, women also under big stress, psychological stress that's really affecting them badly. And that's one of the reasons they also have miscarriages. One picture just came to me about 2 days ago. I tried to put it for you, but it's so disturbing, so we decided not to put the picture. But at the same time, we have a lot of hope, for people there, because also I received another picture of a twin that were delivered by C-section, by the vet physician, supervised and helped by the OB/GYN physician that's in the group, and WhatsApp group, and was able to help them safely to deliver the 2 babies. And he sent us a picture, probably we can show it to you. So that's actually the twin proof that they are stronger than any evil. They're trying to deny him their right to exist. So some of the other personal stories I would like to mention to you. The 12 years old boy came to the point, he's seeing his family are not having food around. He has his younger kids. Younger siblings that they are suffering on a daily basis, not finding anything to eat. And he decided to go and look for food for them. So he's 12 years old, and he felt responsible for his younger siblings. And he went to look for the food, so he came close by to a landmine, and he was trying to collect the grass for them. That's all what he can find, the grass. And as he was trying to collect the grass, a landmine exploded on him. He lost two lower extremities. And this is one of the sad stories. You see 12 years old being responsible, and then also trying to collect the grass and end up with the landmine and losing his lower extremities. This is one of the personal stories that tell you about what's going on in Madaya. Other personal story, because if you look at Zabadani now, Zabadani is completely evacuated from civilians. Nobody is living in Zabadani. 80-90% of the town is completely destroyed now. No single civilians living in Zabadani. All people flee to Buludan, which is another nearby village north of Madaya or Madaya. The lucky people, they went to Madaya because this area under regime, and they were still living there. But still, people who are identified from Zabadani, because it can tell you how the regime and Hezbollah is doing that mass punishment just because Zabadani went against him at some point, trying to help other areas in Syria. So he doing that mass punishment. Anybody is identified from Zabadani will be picked up by the regime from Buludan, and he will be thrown into Madaya. So that's going to be your fate. You go inside Madaya. One example is my cousin, who had 4 children, And she was like shopping in Buludan, like trying to get some food for her children. And then the regime identified her, and he picked her up and he threw her in Madaya. So she's separated from her children. And now 2 months, she couldn't take it anymore. She tried to escape, and also landmine exploded in her, and she lost part of her leg. Now she was able to be picked up, by a medical team, and she was transferred to Damascus, and she's being treated. But she had been suffering from chronic infection at this time. She may lose her leg as well. This is a close cousin that's true story happened to her. Now, talking about some update about what's going on lately in Madaya after like the end of April. Actually, this is the last convoy entered in April. And then since that time, for the last 3 months, nothing being entered to Madaya. And the only thing I saw that was effective in helping Madaya, probably not only the Fort Town agreement, it was more of the media pressure, to be honest with you. And we noticed that when these pictures went wild on the media, and they were like coming out of Madaya, and they were everywhere. And that's when the regime and Hezbollah responded to the pressure. And at that time, he did allow some convoys to enter inside Madaya. They were lucky to have some food enter, but at the same time, the siege never being left. So the siege, continued to be tight-fit, only allow a certain amount of food and a certain type of food to enter Madaya. And that food, mainly carbohydrate, has lack any protein, milk, or any major other nutrients that are necessary for the body. So what we've seen initially, as complete skeleton bodies, thin, weight loss, skeleton bodies, that came images initially was from lack of nutrition completely. Then later on, we saw a lot of swelling coming up. That's because of lack of protein. So people had the carbohydrate, but they lack of protein, and they start to see a lot of swelling that coming to the medical point of Madaya. That's what we have been, dealing with. Now, the other thing that happened, they reported miscarriages, as I mentioned before, and this is another reason because of lack of protein and other nutrients. And also, they talk about a lot of psychological diseases that start to emerge and come into the surface. We know, in Syria, in spite of all the war and everything, that still, suicide rate is low. Because people support each other, because of religious reason. So, but in the last few months, they have been seeing a lot of suicide attempts. And they reported about 12 cases of attempted suicide, and one of them was successful. Some of them, mainly on the youth, boys, who some try to cut their hands, others, they try to throw themselves from high areas, and one of them was successful, unfortunately. Now, also, they reported the cases of children. They start to have a growth problem. Because of lack of protein, they can notice that, over like a year, they can start to see a growth problem. And also they notice lack of teeth or poor teething and stuff like that is coming on the surface as well. Now, before I finish, I want to report, one communication that happened with my cousin, another cousin, who actually I lost connection with him. He was my age, we were in the same class back in Syria, and then I lost connection with him, and then he called me about 2 months ago. He found my number, and he was able to connect with me through the internet. And he started, to report me about the situation in Madaya. And he was like telling me, just 2 days ago we chatted, and he told me about the situation there. Said, in spite that you are from that area, and you have relatives and friends, but it's still hard for me to describe for you what's going on here. And he described a lot of suffering. For example, he described how people are suffering to cook. Now, the United Nations gave, grains, mainly rice and other material like that, but did not give the material needed to cook this food. For example, the town lack any gas. There's no electricity for the last year. There's no gas, no other fuel resources. They lack diesel and others. So only what they have to cook on is wood. And he said that if you're lucky to find the wood, to cook, and that's very costly. He described the kilogram of wood, it cost about 500 Syrian pounds. And if he said you want to do one cook, one large meal for a family, that probably will need about 6 kilograms of that wood. And that's cost about 3,000 Syrian pounds, which is a very large amount to people inside. They cannot afford that. He also talked to me about the children and lack of milk. And he said, if you're lucky to find the milk, it will be in the drops. They give it to you in drops. And then only given to the children less than 2 years old. Anything older than 2 years old, they are denied milk. You have no way to get milk. So they will dream to taste milk. There's another issue. The other issue he mentioned to me, all quoted from him, he talked about also like water. which is the regime in Hezbollah, they did not feel satisfied just by cutting food. And also they want to cut water on people. And he said, like, because of lack of electricity, there's no water coming to houses now, so people go to wells and natural springs, try to collect some water and deliver to their houses. But the regime in Hezbollah trying to control over one of the major natural springs and next to Madaya, and he trying to cut water and make people die from thirst as well. So can you imagine this happen now in the 21st century when we see this in front of our eyes by globalization, by media and internet, and still we're not able to do much about it. And now, if I want to, summarize the situation, and really in Madaya, I would say it's like I describe it like a death camp. It's similar to what the Nazis and Hitler did the Jew in the Holocaust. The regime in Hezbollah is starving people to death, and not only this, is a slow death. And people are sometimes, they wish this, get over. They die, quickly, and they get this over. So this is, really describe the situation there. What I really want to mention some of the comment that came from inside, mainly about the United Nations. I have all the respect for the work done by the United Nations, but at the same time, people are very frustrated by them. They lost trust on the United Nations. Why they lost trust? Because there is a lot of worries without any action. On the last 5 years, they start to worry when they hear the United Nations is worrying, because they know there's no action coming with this. So the United Nations, responsible, for stopping the war and ending conflict and returning peace to any area, but they are not doing their job for a reason or another. There's a lot of link between politics and a humanitarian delivery and aid. And this is a big issue that people are suffering from inside Madaya. They are questioning why people are lifting them alone, why the whole, international community turned their back on them and they are not helping them at all. So with this, I finish my talk. I will be happy to take any questions anybody have.
Thank you very much both for the interesting remarks. So Dr. Ammar, let me start with you before we turn it to the audience to get questions. Let me start with a couple of questions. Since you are from Zabadani and you know the area very well, now there's a concern that battles will break out in other towns in Wadi Barada. So if that happens, how do you expect the situation to be there in those towns? If people there want to leave, you mentioned that Hezbollah is involved in the siege. Can they go to Lebanon? Can they head to the borders? Did anyone do that? What happened? And also, if you have any recommendations for the international community to deliver aids to those areas.
So thank you very much. As you probably mentioned before, there's nobody's allowed to leave the town. So you either die and face your death inside the town, or you die on the way out. So this is a situation. Only some lucky people who had a connection has the money, they can escape. For example, we have one of the physicians, actually, he was a nurse practitioner, that he was doing majority of the medical work inside Madaya. His name is Dr. Khalid. He's called Dr. Khalid, even he's a nurse, but he worked like a physician. So Dr. Khalid, actually, he had direct threatening from Hezbollah. Either he stopped sending this media report and pictures, or he would be killed directly inside Madaya. They kind of give him money to somebody to go and kill him. And he, changed his name, and he was able to escape with a large amount of money and connection that he was allowed to leave, and he's currently safe in Lebanon. But this is one example, but other people is not able. If they don't have the money, to escape, or they have that connection, they're not be able to allow to go out. Now, for the other, fighting that happening around, as you can see, these are pockets, of areas that all under besiege. So, it doesn't matter much to the people of Madaya, because they are under complete, siege now. They don't have any open roads, So if there's more besiege happen to other areas, they are not going to be any more difference for them. So if the situation change in Wadi Barada, is not going to make a big difference before. People, from certain organizations try to open a road between Wadi Barada and Madaya, but they were unsuccessful. Even they tried to, having this information, I know personally that some people try to dig a tunnel to try to reach and send food inside Madaya, but they were unsuccessful as well. Now, for the international community, we all know, what we need to do. We need really to lift the siege okay, and give their people their rights. I mean, we're not going to go and deliver some food and say that's all what you right to have. We have to lift the siege completely and give them a freedom of movement and give them the rights. I mean, the right to exist and to be away from this conflict that's happening there. And this has to be pushed by everybody. And I want to emphasize, I mean, the point again, that the media is the major thing. I mean, all of us, we can do a lot of work here. We can really reach out and increase awareness and tell other people, like, this is situation in Madaya. And if we increase awareness, that we're going to make a difference for these people.
Thank you very much. And Elise, also, what recommendations do you have for also the INGOs? And many people here in DC, they think, like, what can we do to make conditions better? You mentioned also that some expired food were delivered to Madaya by the UN. Why did that happen? Was it a mistake? And how can we make sure that won't happen again in the future?
So I guess related to your second question about the expired food, the UN reported that the expired biscuits were included. It was a result of a human error, and they apologized for it. It's still a little unclear exactly how it happened, but it sounded like they basically just loaded the wrong food into the convoy. And, you know, there isn't, like, the UN is the one who is, you know, responsible for loading the convoys, and I think they are working hard to ensure that that doesn't happen again, and they were very apologetic about it. With regards to what other international NGOs can do, I think what Dr. Ghanem was saying is that the media is really what allowed the response that we saw in January with the monthly aid deliveries between January and April only happened because there was such a large outcry about the deaths from malnutrition and starvation and the deaths from landmines and snipers. And so, you know, if we can have a unified voice in calling for you know, an end to the siege, because as our report shows, no amount of aid deliveries are going to be sufficient to really alleviate the conditions that are inside besieged areas, because people need constant access to food, they need constant access to services, they need to be able to access services that are available outside Madaya, because what is available in Madaya is just totally insufficient. So there definitely needs to be a unified call for an end to all sieges across Syria. But in the meantime, as we are working towards that, you know, that overall goal of ending the sieges, we can be putting forth very specific recommendations about how to improve the few aid deliveries that are still going through. So whether it's, you know, just in the first place getting aid deliveries to go through, so if the Syrian government continues to deny access on the ground, they need to, or the UN needs to consider implementing airdrops, because, you know, that it's not cost effective, it's dangerous, but the alternative is that people are starving to death. And so it is a last resort, but we are at the last resort. So that, you know, that is something our organizations are calling for. But within, even if you're carrying out those airdrops or getting aid in, you need to make sure that the aid that is supplied is actually what is needed on the ground. So talking to the healthcare providers and the residents that are in Madaya and other besieged areas and finding out what they need, making sure that they're providing sufficient nutrients, you know, enough protein, enough dairy, enough vitamins, so that, you know, the aid deliveries that are going through are not going to make conditions worse and will actually alleviate, you know, the health conditions that people are suffering from.
Please, if you have a question now, just introduce yourself and your affiliation, and feel free to direct the question to either Elise or Ammar or both of them. Okay, we have the mic there. Please.
Hi, Daniel Salem from the Holocaust Museum. I'm just wondering, in the course of policy conversations that you've had in New York with the UN and in DC with the US government, I'm wondering what the response of policymakers at those institutions has been to the report and to your recommendations that you lay out in terms of ending the sieges. Thanks.
Sure, I can start. I think the so we've been having meetings with UN officials at aid agencies at different countries' missions to the UN, and we're meeting with US government folks as well here in DC. And I think the reaction we've gotten is that, this report is very useful in showing what it is actually like for people living inside Madaya. Everybody has heard the reports of deaths from malnutrition and starvation. They've heard reports that aid deliveries are going through, but I think before this report came out, there was a lack of understanding, at least at outside of the Syrian community, of what it is like for people who are still in these besieged areas. So I think the fact that we were able to paint this portrait and show, even with aid deliveries, this is still an insufficient response, I think that's been very helpful for them in moving forward their basically their advocacy goals of ending the sieges.
Okay, any more questions?
Ron Waldman from Doctors of the World, Medicine. You've mentioned the UN a lot. I wonder if you could say anything about specific agencies, such as the World Health Organization. How do you feel that they have been acting in regard to Madaya specifically, but during the Syria crisis in general as well? They are responsible for public health and medicine.
Yeah, I don't know if Elise can help us answering that question, but I know, working with the field hospital of Madaya, there's nothing much have been done. They allow, when the convoys enter Madaya, they allow some medication to enter Madaya as well. And the specific evacuation of certain few cases that were allowed and nothing else. So we know that the help came from the Red Cross mainly. The Red Cross teams was able to enter Madaya and evaluate. They were not able to treat or provide any service. It's just they went and evaluated the situation there. But this organization, I think they are, they are not doing their job, and like they are not able to change the situation there because it's forced by, the regime and other armed forces not to do their job. It's probably this is the problem. So what we have seen is not enough. We need some more to be done. For example, we need, medical staff to be able to enter Madaya and help. We need these people are needed more advanced medical care to go inside Damascus and receive the care that they deserve as well. So nothing of this being done. But if you come to the WHO, I don't know if you had more comment about that.
I think there's been quite a bit of criticism of the WHO, of UN OCHA, and other UN agencies, and I think, they are doing a lot of work. They are working very hard to get aid to all areas across Syria, but the Syrian government has, implemented restrictions that are preventing them from, providing aid to opposition-controlled areas. And so the fact that the Syrian government, which is a party to the conflict, is able to say what aid can go where and what types of aid and what amount of aid is, a little bit ridiculous in itself. And, the Syrian government shouldn't be the one who gets to say medical aid cannot go to Madaya in this aid delivery. So I would say the system is, preventing the WHO and preventing OCHA from doing the job that they should be doing.
Hi, thank you. My name is Jemana, and I thank you very much for your report. I wanted to ask specifically about the voice of healthcare workers and doctors in terms of the peace process. Have you, with Stefan de Mistura's initiative, what avenues have there been for your voices to be heard in this process? Is he, soliciting your advice in terms of how to address these critical immediate needs as he goes on with the Geneva peace process? Thank you.
I think many of them has a connection. They attempted to, be involved in the peace process because, this is the only solution they see for the humanitarian crisis that happened in Madaya and other areas as well. But at the same time, they're not able to do any change. This is a big of the problem. What we try to build, we built also advocacy group for Madaya, and that advocacy group mainly connected to active SAMS member and other members as well. And we try to connect them to the media, and that's what happened in January. We are not the only group that work on this. There's multiple other groups that work on that as well, but we were able to be successful that much, to be able to get some help to inside Madaya. But for the peace talk and stuff like that, they try, but I don't think their voice being heard. They're not able to change anything on the ground. That's the reality there.
Hi, Darren Fenwick, and thanks again, as Jumana said, echoing thanks for this wonderful report. Have you all tracked any of the people who have been evacuated to Damascus? I'm wondering about, have you heard about retaliation or what happens? I know I have a friend in Madaya, and so one of the concerns we had about him being evacuated, because there was an assassination attempt on his life, is that if he were to go to Damascus, then if he were to get better and recover, then they would say, hey, either take him to the military or throw him in prison. So have you all had any follow-up or followed any of the people who've been evacuated?
There's actually one case reported to us that, he was evacuated because he was completely sick and he needed advanced medical care. And then, yes, he had a lot of torture that happened. And actually, a person from Red Cross, he went directly and visited that person in the hospital. And then after they finished treating him, they sent him back to Madaya. This is the situation. So they treated him and then they sent him back to Madaya.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Clark, and I work at the Public International Policy Group. My question, first of all, thank you for your presentation. My question is, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to some of the rationale behind sieges, because I've heard instances and analysis that have said that a lot of the sieges are being used to raise revenue for economic reasons, that there are also checkpoints where people are being involuntarily conscripted into the regime's military. I don't know if you've seen evidence of some of these other tactics being used and people being taken advantage of because of the sieges, but I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Definitely, that's a very good question, and you are absolutely right. There's not too many people recognize this. The besiege is applied on certain areas, in many areas in Syria, and it looks like a new strategy that the regime has been using, and it's working for him. It's working for him at multiple levels. He doesn't care, of course. Except that, having some gain. He having some gain on the ground, and also he have economic gain from this. We know, people who's trying to get money inside Madaya. That, for example, if you had, $100, which is you can exchange it for 50,000 Syrian pounds. There is a mafia connected to the checkpoints and other. They give you about 39,000 Syrian pounds. So instead, they caught 11,000 Syrian pounds. So this is economic gain for them. For example, they allow some food to go in, through these checkpoints, and they sell the food for maybe 10 times, if not more, higher price, and they make money out of this. So this is economic gain for them, absolutely, from doing this. Now the other, strategy they are using, they are doing a mass punishment, in my opinion, because even I know people who are pro-regime. Okay, they did not want this to happen. And they did not want the regime to go away. But they still been taken and thrown inside Madaya because he is a person from Zabadani. Because Zabadani rose against the regime, they decided anybody from Zabadani, just by looking at his ID, we take him inside the besieged area. So he's doing that mass punishment without differentiating between different peoples. Now, I want to mention one more thing here, that the people of Zabadani are not happy about the 4-town agreement that happened, because that linking political process to humanitarian aid. Not only this, their decision out of their hands. The decision as made by people they don't know. This decision made in Idlib and other areas in Turkey and other places, people who they don't know completely. Nobody represent the people of Zabadani on these deals that happen, and the decision is completely out of their hands.
I would just add that we've also with the 4 towns agreement and the sort of political negotiation there, that could also encourage other besiegement, because the opposition in Idlib can say, oh, if we besiege these towns that are controlled by the Syrian government, then we have more sway over opposition controlled areas that are besieged by Syrian government forces in other areas. So this sort of tit for tat agreement is could encourage other other parties to besiege other communities as well.
Hi, I'm Cameron Ashkar with the Psy Institute. Dr. Ghanem mentioned a little bit about some of the technological things you're trying to do to improve the situation. I was just curious what other type of technological efforts you've been thinking about trying to employ with emergent technology, with cell phones, apps, things that can track what kind of medical, skin problems or things like that you can do through applications, if that's being considered, and if so, what are some of those things?
It's mainly the idea of the telemedicine, and we have a lot of experience as SAMs volunteers. They work on telemedicine at different levels, mainly on the north. Telemedicine is applied mainly to the ICU, but I mean we try to apply to other areas, and we try to do telemedicine office, clinic work. But the problem we are facing, kind of lack everything that's needed for this service. I mean, it can be very successful if you be able to have all the resources needed. For example, we don't have cameras. We were thinking about, okay, we set up a clinic maybe 4 hours a day, and during these 4 hours, we have a nurse that they come, and the nurse can set up the patients for us, and we see the patient directly. They can, examine the patient for us and decide about medical decision and help them out. But we don't have these cameras available, and we don't have the resources for doing this. Add to this, if you want to treat the patient, they don't have any. They only had the basic labs and X-ray they can do. They don't have any ultrasound. They don't have any advanced labs they can do there. And also they lack all medication needed. They only had a few medication was allowed to enter by the Red Cross and United Nations. Basically, this medication of chronic disease and antibiotics. They're allowed to enter there. But otherwise, you ask for more specific drugs, it's always unavailable. So how can be able to help these people unless you have the resources enough to help them out? Like thinking about other technologies, if you have any idea, I would be happy to apply. Always there is a lot of limitation to be able to apply any of these services.
My name is Ammar Ghanem. I'm a mental health professional with some interest in Syria. My brain is sort of stuck on the story of the expired food and the moldy biscuits making a lot of people sick. And I keep thinking, what an unfortunately perfect illustration of the failures of the UN. In the warehouses or wherever, you can have people with the most minimal education checking the dates before anything goes out. Everybody has known far before most of you were born, that you send powdered milk. And with these shipments also, you don't just send carbohydrates. You also send in rehydration salts, little packages of rehydration salts that takes up no space. And they're simple things, the most concrete things. The UN is always, excuse me, but I have friends who work for the UN, but nevertheless, up in the sky somewhere, or up in tall towers. And these most basic failures to deliver decent and appropriate food just are horrendous.
And I make a comment, I completely agree with what you have said. And actually, when initially this happened, I get the first pictures of this expired food, and I have it in my camera here if anybody want to see the expired date, and also the date of delivery. So that's proof of what happened. This is a big failure, as you said. But initially we thought also, because too many people get sick, we thought about a syndrome called refeeding syndrome. Because people they are lacking nutrition for a long time, then we go ahead and give them some sort of food, and they eat a big amount. They can have electrolytes, the deficiencies and abnormality. They can lead to refeeding syndrome, which is a life-threatening condition. I will try to give them advice, but ultimately we recognize these are the expired food that was the problem. But we face a lot of cases from refeeding syndrome as well when the food enters Madaya as well.
I also have a question for both of you. With all these heartbreaking facts, we don't see them reflected in the media. How do you assess the media coverage of the communities under siege in Syria? And if you think it's not taking what it deserves from the media, why do you think that, and what recommendations do you have the U.S. media and the international media?
I think the media did a very good job of publicizing the situation in Madaya at the end of December and early January, when there were all of these reports of deaths from malnutrition and starvation. But it was only because these pictures were available, because they were so striking, that the media was really able to latch onto this and make it an international story and put it in the international spotlight. So I think it would be great if that could happen more often, but I think unfortunately with Syria there are so many there's so many horrific stories, across the entire country. So, Madaya conditions are horrible there right now, but Aleppo has just become under siege. That's a town or a city of 300,000 people that is being bombed on a daily basis. So, the media will go to the new situation that has arisen, and I think specifically related to besieged areas, it's really hard for journalists to get information outside of besieged areas because there is nobody traveling back and forth. Because you have to, be directly in contact with folks on the ground inside these communities that are often, don't have, very reliable internet, don't have very good electricity, and are basically shut off from the outside world. So, if there is a way to, I guess, strengthen those relationships and do consistent reporting, I think that would be excellent. And, Syrian media has done a very good job of covering these stories. It's the international media that, they have media fatigue, and that's, if we can, I guess if NGOs can come together with a more unified voice to make these stories more accessible and also more immediate, I think that will make a difference, at least on the international media side.
Any questions from here or from the other room also? There's no questions. Okay, is it
Thank you very much all for being here today with us. Would you like to add any last comments before we conclude, Elise or
I just would like to thank you again for coming today, and you being here is going to be a lot of help for the people inside Syria. Just don't leave from here and we'll do anything. Each of us can do a lot, so please help us. Thank you.
Thank you.